My computer is telling me it is right at 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Welcome, everyone. This is the Tools for Everyone training, where we're going to be talking about universal strategies that you can use with anyone you come in contact with. I am going to be your trainer today. My name is Brandy Allen. I am the Positive Supports Consultant lead for the North region of the state, and I actually work out of the Kirksville Regional Office. I've been on the tiered supports team for about 2 years now, and I'd love to hear a little more about you all and where you're from and what you do. So as we go through today's class, you do have access to the chat box over on the right side of your screen. There is a little downward facing arrow next to the word chat. So if you don't have your chat box open, go ahead and click on that downward facing arrow and it will open it up for you. And that's where we will be communicating and interacting together during today's class. So if you all don't mind, if you could just put in your name and what agency or organization you are with and what your role is with that agency. We'll do some quick little introductions through chat. Welcome, AJ. Service coordinator with Compass Health. All right. Another support coordinator, Lindsay, welcome. Welcome, Terry. Oh, I love to see the regional office staff joining. Karen with the regional office as well. Perfect. I love that you're in a different role. Amy with central office. We got a group on the computer here with Preferred Family Healthcare. Welcome. I see Julie from the Albany Regional Office, Inquiry Coordinator. Amanda with Northwest Missouri Psych Rehab. That's awesome. Awesome, Amanda. Welcome. My daughter actually lives in St. Joe now. Brenda with the Kansas City Regional Office. Emma, a med student observing at the DMH State Hospital. Great. Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome this beautiful Friday morning. We have a lot of information to get through in the next couple of hours, so I am going to dive right in. As we go through the information in today's training, you will be able to use that chat box to respond to questions that we ask and work on activities throughout the session. You may want to grab some paper just to take notes and be able to work on those activities. So during today's session, what we want you to walk away knowing is how to present this material in a way to understand what universal strategies are. So we're going to be talking about those positive behavior supports, which are basically just a way of the way that you respond and communicate to others in a way that does not worsen your relationship. We're going to be talking about fundamental facts about behavior, and we're going to be talking about the 4 categories of behavior and how that can help you target those behaviors to change those behaviors for others in the future, or change your responses to those behaviors so that you can initiate that change for others. We're also going to be talking about coercion and punishment, what the effects are of those, and that we all have a tendency to use coercion and punishment. And we're going to talk about why we should try to avoid using those. We're going to go into detail about the 10 types of coercion that we should try to avoid, and just in general talk about how we can improve our interactions with others. And in return, by changing our responses, we can help improve behaviors of others. So just a quick question before we move on here. A lot of times when we say behavior change, what we think of is that we're trying to change an undesirable behavior into something more desirable. Can you guys give me some examples of maybe some poor behaviors or bad habits that you might try to get others to change? And what have you tried in the past on how to change those behaviors? Feel free to put those in the chat box there. And you can even think of a specific behavior and maybe what techniques did you use to try to change that behavior? Can anyone think of a behavior of someone that you've worked with that maybe you wanted to try to change, and what techniques you use to try to change that? It could be an example even from one of your kiddos. Maybe your kiddos has a behavior that gets under your skin, that you just really don't like it when they do that. And so what have you tried to get them to change that behavior? All right. Sarah says that when clients are interrupting in group sessions, they provided education and a set of group norms as to why that's inappropriate. Okay, yeah. So you're trying to set those expectations. Do you do that as a group, Sarah? You don't call anyone out individually? Sometimes. Okay, sometimes it's a group thing. Okay, yeah. Um, a lot of times, like for my daughter, like if she's inappropriately using her social media or her cell phone, I might use takeaway um, as a technique to try to get her to stop that behavior. Basically, we just want to think about, are the techniques that we're using to try to change someone's behavior actually working? So let's go into a little bit about positive behavior support. The definition of positive behavior support is increasing the quality of life through the science of behavior. There are many, many, many studies out there that have proven that using positive behavior support principles and techniques can be very effective to change behavior. On my particular team with the state, we work on the tiered supports team. And so we're actually focused on this triangle that's demonstrated on this slide here. I actually work on the tier 1 team, which is the bottom of the triangle, the green stripe at the bottom. That green base actually represents the universal strategies that we can put in place that would improve the quality of life for everyone. In a general population, 80 or 90% of people would only need these universal supports to have successful outcomes and a high quality of life. That yellow center would be, it represents the population that is at risk for poor outcomes. And it often, this is where we might provide interventions that look like an extra scoop of that universal strategy. So these are people who may be at risk. They need a little extra support. And so we might offer them some targeted interventions that can be short term, and they would fade out as that high risk decreases for that individual. In the general population, 10 to 15% of people might need this level of intervention, so this higher risk. And then at the very top of the triangle, the little red piece at the top, that represents those people who might be in crisis and they are in need of short-term intensive supports. In the general population, that might be 5% or fewer that would need that level of intervention. As we go through today's training, we're actually going to be focused on the bottom of the triangle, the base, where we're talking about those universal behavior support strategies that everyone needs for a high quality of life. So, in talking about positive behavior supports, this can be hard, right? We really want to, when we use positive behavior support, we want to react in a way that's not mean or cold when people are angry or upset. We really want to respond with kindness, but also being somewhat non emotional can be effective in helping calm a situation down, especially if it's an escalated situation. We don't want to give too much attention or reaction to that higher level of emotion that that person is having. When we're able to react that way with kindness and with a minimal emotional response, usually we can de-escalate the situation and we can ensure that we haven't made the situation worse, either now or in the future. So when we respond with that kindness and caring all the time, it means that we really have to be focused on keeping our cool. We don't take things personally. We don't respond in that emotional way, even if we do feel a personal response. And we always want to try to make sure that we don't do things that will get back with others or try to hurt them back when they've hurt us. And that's really hard, right? Because we all want to respond in an emotional and personal way sometimes. And so it really takes mindful practice to manage your reactions. Even myself, I teach this every day, every week. And it's still difficult for me sometimes to not respond in that emotional or coercive way. But I have seen, as I've been able to manage my reactions, I have seen more positive relationship building happen between myself and my family, my coworkers, anyone that I come in contact with. Using this type of management of your response can be very effective to help you build more positive relationships. So let's talk a little bit about behavior. Um, if you guys had to explain behavior as to someone who didn't speak English, how would you define behavior? Feel free to type in the chat box there how you would explain what behavior is. All right, verbal and physical aggression. Let me see here. I got AJ's making deals or finding specific motivators. I'm going to write these on my slide. There's a little bit of a delay in you guys being able to see them, so just know that they'll pop up here in a second. Thank you all for your responses. Lindsay says responses to people's environment. Different ways we act or respond or actions. All right, those are all very good responses. As we move forward here, let me give you the true definition of behavior. So, behavior is anything a person does that can be seen and counted. So I really liked that last response here. Um, there were a couple more after that. But April's response of actions, yeah, behavior is actions a lot of times. It's anything a person does that can be seen and counted. Sarah also said anything can be a behavior. That's exactly right. Our responses to internal thoughts and feelings or external cues. Yeah, exactly. It's those responses. It is those actions that people are having. Anything that a person does that can be seen and counted is defined as behavior. So when we think about defining a behavior, we always want to put it to the dead man's test, which means that if a dead man can do it, then it is not a behavior. It has to be something that a live human person could have that action. So just remember, behavior is anything that a person does that can be seen and counted. Now, with that in mind, can you guys give me some examples of behavior? We're going to make a list here on this slide. So feel free to put some things in the chat box there. Let's see here. AJ says yelling, screaming, hitting. Those are all good ones. Yes. Give me some more, guys. What is a behavior? Um, Anything that can be seen or counted. Give me some specific behaviors. Yeah, laughing, crying, running. Hitting. Yes, we've got that one in there. Um, what about, let me see here, check my chat box here. Yelling, rocking is a good one. Yes. Self-harm, for sure. What about smiling? Having a tantrum. All right, throwing things. Another good one. Yes. All right. So let's look at our list here. Hopefully it's all popped up on your end. As I said, sometimes there's a delay as I type on here for when you can see it. But as we look at our list here, we might see, let's look at how many negative things we see. So we've got yelling, screaming, hitting, Crying might be negative. Self-harm, a tantrum, or throwing things. So in our list that we have on our slide here, we probably have a lot more things that fall into the negative category than a positive category, right? We have a tendency to do this when we use the word behavior to think about it in that negative context. We need to reframe the way that we think about behavior with that definition that behavior is anything that can be seen or counted. It can be positive or negative, right? We typically have that tendency to focus on the negative. But as we go through a couple more slides, we'll probably come back to this list a little bit and talk about some of the words on here. So let's go ahead and move ahead here. You guys made a really great list. Most of the suggestions that you all made were very specific actions rather than categories. When we are talking about behavior, we want to make sure that we're not using what we call big old category words. Things that maybe words that we use. I actually threw one in on our list back here. The tantrum is considered a big old category word. Because if you had to define what specific actions were occurring during a tantrum, what a tantrum looks like to me might not look the same as it will look to AJ or to Sarah, right? So when we want to try to be very specific when we're describing behavior and try to avoid those big category words, like saying rude. What does rude look like? Like I can't define rude as a specific action that can be seen or counted, right? I would want to identify the specific behaviors that are occurring, like that person was staring, or they were cutting in line, or they were saying, look at that person, what were they thinking? Making that rude comment, right? So we would want to be very specific in explaining what the behavior was that we were seeing. That's something to keep in mind, especially if you do documentation. We want to try to avoid using those category words, but rather break down that category into the specific behaviors that you can see and observe. So on this next slide, we're going to jump into those 4 categories of behavior that I referenced in our objectives. When we look at behavior, we have a tendency to put it into 4 different categories, 2 that are desirable and 2 that are undesirable. As we talk about behaviors, we really want to be able to identify what type of behavior is occurring because it can shape the way that we respond to that behavior. Let's look at the desirable side first. So we have significant desirable behaviors. These are those behaviors that are very important. They're often the ones that we try to teach individuals to do, such as like how to help someone at the right time, or to get them to increase those types of behaviors. Significant behaviors are going to be the ones that increase the quality of life for an individual. So things like getting a job, filling out job applications, learning to drive. Those are significant desirable behaviors. Okay. If we move down to the other category of desirable behavior, it's the just okay behaviors. These are the ones that people often do without expectation. Things like using manners, saying please and thank you, shutting the door when they come in from outside, pushing in your chair when you leave the table. Those just okay behaviors that we just expect someone to do, and we don't often acknowledge them for doing that. The important thing about just okay behaviors is that, especially as we work with individuals who might have some undesirable behavior, if we're able to focus on the just okay behaviors, the things that they are doing well, that can increase the frequency that they continue to have more desirable behaviors, as because the more that we can point out what they're doing well, the greater the tendency that they're going to repeat those behaviors in the future. So let's talk a little bit about undesirable behaviors. We have two types. Serious are the ones where they're serious. They're behaviors that are causing a real dangerous situation. They could be something that is illegal. It's causing harm to themselves, to others, to property. So serious behaviors, things that we would definitely want to intervene in. Okay. And then the last type of undesirable behavior is junk behavior. These are those undesirable behaviors that we don't like to see, but they're not really hurting anyone. They're not dangerous. So just things that are annoying, things like burping in public or interrupting. Can you guys think of any other junk behaviors that maybe get under your skin, but they don't really hurt anyone? They're really more just a problem for us. I know my son is a percussionist, and so he's forever tapping on things, and it drives me crazy. And it's just a junk behavior. It gets under my skin. It doesn't hurt anyone, but it's just kind of a pet peeve thing. Do you guys have any behaviors like that that you encounter? I'm thinking there's a delay on my end when you all type something in the chat box as well. Sarah says constantly getting up from the group or pacing. Yeah, that could be a junk behavior. It gets under our skin, but maybe it's necessary for that individual because, they can't handle sitting for an extended period of time, or they need that movement to be able to fully digest the content of what's going on within that group. Obsessive questioning. Oh yes, that's a good one that we see a lot. Yeah. Just yeah, that perseveration where they continue to ask the same question. Cracking their knuckles. Yes, that's another one that just gets under your skin, but it's not really hurting anyone. Yeah. So, we're going to talk a little bit later about a tool that we can use for how to respond to junk behavior. But right now, since we have so much to cover, I'm going to go ahead and jump on here. As we think about those four categories of behavior and whether a behavior is desirable or undesirable, a lot of times it depends on the context in which that behavior occurs. So let's say we had on our list the behavior of crying. Crying could be something that's desirable. It could also be something that's undesirable. Can you guys think of a situation where crying might be a good thing? And put that in the chat box. And then also, if you have an example of when crying might be undesirable, like what kinds of situations would we view crying as undesirable? Yeah, I got everyone's response here all at once. So Sarah said, when crying could be a healthy release of emotion. Yeah, that would definitely be desirable, right? Um, Again, Emma says the same thing when they're processing their emotions. It's Lindsay says it's an appropriate response when they're crying because someone lost a friendship. Yeah, so maybe they're crying in a sympathetic or empathetic way with a friend. Maybe they've lost someone and it's perfectly natural to cry, right? Um, Karen gives an example of when it might be undesirable. When you cry just because you're not getting what you want, and maybe that's a tactic that the individual uses to try to get their way. Yeah, exactly. Like within a temper tantrum. Yes. Yeah. And when grieving, that would be a desirable release of emotions. Yeah. So when we think about the behaviors that someone has, we always want to take into account what's happening around that particular behavior, whether it's an appropriate or inappropriate response. And that can help us know how to respond, whether that behavior is desirable or undesirable. So let's talk a little bit about significant desirable behaviors. Like I said a minute ago, these are the behaviors that we're trying to increase. They're the behaviors that are going to help people succeed, increase their quality of life, those independent living skills that are going to help them be more independent, more self-sufficient, and just generally have a higher quality of life. So let's see here. Can you guys think of some examples of significant behaviors? One that I can give you as you guys are typing in the chat box, um, maybe in the movie theater, you have an individual who is whispering so that only their partner that they're with can hear them and they're not disturbing everyone else within the theater. So that would be a significant desirable behavior. Another one might be making sure that you pay for the items that you um, get in the store, like pay for them before you use them, pay for them before you leave the store. Those are significant desirable behaviors, right? Can you guys think of some other significant desirable behaviors? Oh yeah, AJ says good manners. Yeah, for sure. Especially if it's in someone who hasn't typically used that and they're just now starting to use those good manners. Lindsay says when someone apologizes for their behavior. Yeah, that true recognition of I did something wrong and I want to correct this. I want to let you know that I did something wrong. Yeah, those are great examples. So let's talk about the just okay behaviors a little more. Again, like I said, these are those behaviors that are often common. They're overlooked. We take them for granted. We usually only notice them when they don't happen. So things like using manners. If it's someone who typically has good manners and says thank you and please and excuse me, a just okay behavior might be when we go to work and we get there on time. Like no one gives us a prize or recognizes us for going to work on time, right? It's kind of a just okay behavior. Can you guys think of any other like just okay behaviors, things that we might want to recognize and point out that we appreciate someone is doing, but we kind of don't always do that because we just expect it. I can tell you one that I use in my household. is my husband doing the dishes. So typically it's always been my job to do the dishes at home. And our dishwasher broke like a year ago, and I was like, oh, I'll just wash them by hand. We're not going to buy a new one. And so it kind of became my job to do the dishes. But when he steps up and he does the dishes for me, I am recognizing that. I am like, oh, honey, thank you so much for doing those dishes. Like, I really appreciate it. And honestly, that's a just okay behavior, right? It's not something that he really needs appreciation for. But when I give him that recognition and tell him thank you and that I appreciate it, he's been a lot more likely to repeat it in the future. So AJ says, yeah, you made it to work today. You're the best at that. Yeah, good work performance. That is exactly right. A lot of times we do a really good job, but we don't ever hear it from management, right? And that can be really important and valuable. Just okay behaviors, responding to questions and cooperating. Yeah. Like I just got back from a conference and, they praised and praised and praised everyone who spoke up and asked questions and engaged in those sessions. It's kind of just expected when you're at a learning conference, right? But yeah, we want to recognize those behaviors. Okay, let's talk about junk behaviors. Again, these are those behaviors that we usually spend the majority of our time and energy trying to stop. They tend to upset us the most because they get under our skin. They're annoying, right? What do you guys think? Okay, the notes on my slide say, what do you think would be the definition of junk behavior? We've talked about the definition of junk behavior. It's those behaviors that get under our skin. We've talked about examples. Let's talk a little bit about, those of you who haven't responded, what's a junk behavior that gets under your skin and how do you respond to it? Like, what's your typical response to that junk behavior? So going back to the example of my son, who is a percussionist and taps on everything, I really, really try to just hold my tongue and not acknowledge the tapping for the longest time until I just reach my breaking point and I end up snapping at him, just stop it. Like that's my reaction to his junk. Ignore it, ignore the junk behavior. Yeah. And we're going to have a little discussion about that in a little bit, about how ignoring junk behavior isn't always the best way to approach it or to change that behavior. We're going to give you a good technique that you can use to respond to junk behavior in a way that might change it so that it doesn't reoccur in the future. So just a little anticipation there. All right. So again, definition of junk behavior, that behavior that's undesirable, it's annoying, but it's not physically harmful. It's not harmful to the individual, to others, to property, and it's not illegal. We've talked about some common junk behaviors that we've seen. I'm not going to go into that anymore. Here's some other examples of junk behavior. Things like cursing, threatening others, not going to work, not being respectful, slamming doors, screaming, name calling, saying mean things. The only issue that I have with this list of examples is that we can't describe a behavior as the act of not having a behavior. So when we say not going to work, what are we doing instead? Remember, behavior is something that we can see and we can count. And so I guess I could see you not going to work and I could count how many times you didn't go to work, but what were you doing instead? Because remember, when we document behavior, we want to document what is actually happening. by using the word not in front of an example of behavior, we're actually making that a category of behavior. And so we really want to be specific in explaining what's happening in that moment. So if I am not going to work, what am I doing instead? Refusing to go to work. Yeah, I could be refusing to go to work. Um, Maybe I'm laying on my couch and binge watching Netflix instead of going to work, right? um, the thing when you use the word not is that you can get all kinds of answers um, to describe what is actually happening instead. So let's do a little activity here. So I am going to snap my fingers. Um, and then every time I snap my fingers, I want you to type something that I am not doing in the chat box. Okay, so we're going to start here. Here's my first snap. So tell me something I am not doing. I'm not typing. I'm not laughing. I'm not running. I'm not talking. One more time. Tell me what I'm not doing. I'm not eating. I'm not educating you. I'm not talking. Yeah. Yeah. So we can get lots and lots of answers about what we are not doing, right? But if we had to describe the behavior of what I was doing, what was that? I was snapping my fingers, right? So we just want to be careful when we're describing behavior that we don't use the word not in front of a behavior. We want to be very specific about what is happening. All right, let's talk a little bit about why people have junk behavior. What are some reasons that an individual might curse at someone else? Give me some reasons in the chat box there. So if I think about why my son taps on everything, well, it's because he's a percussionist. It's because he has a need to have that rhythm and to practice, the songs and the notes in his head. Like it's just a natural thing for him. So someone might have junk behavior because someone got hurt. Is that what you're saying, AJ? Yeah. So yeah, maybe someone like there was a fight and maybe the other person was cursing at the person who instigated the fight. Um, why people curse? April says trauma, developmental disability. They're having withdrawal. Maybe their medication is affecting their behavior. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of reasons that someone could curse. I mean, it may just be that that's what they grew up doing, right? That's what they heard. And so that's what they know. Um, how about people who complain about food or groups or peers or, whatever we complain about? Why do people complain about things? Like what's the point of that behavior? What are they trying to get out of it? But yeah, so mood disorders, that might be something, yeah, to try to get something else, to make them feel better about their own actions. Yeah, attention. Yeah, maybe to try to get someone else to agree with them. Oh yeah, those are all great answers. So we have to think about that with every behavior that someone has, there's always a reason for that behavior. When we look at the function of behavior analysts and how they do their job, is they're looking at that function of behavior. So basically, the why, they want to get down to the why someone is having that behavior. Maybe it's for attention. Maybe it's to escape the situation that they're in. Maybe it's to try to gain some type of control from a coercive response that they had gotten from the other individual. So we always want to think about that there is a reason why someone is having that behavior, and we're going to have to try to get down to the why and use that tool that I talked about earlier called Pivot to help us respond to junk behavior. All right. This slide is actually just a little reminder to us that to remember that junk behavior is behavior that does not cause harm to anyone or anything. Serious behavior is serious behavior, like it causes physical damage to an individual, to others, to property, or it's illegal. And when individuals have serious behaviors, we always need to intervene because we want to ensure that that person is safe and that everyone else around them is safe. That is our first concern. Serious behaviors are dangerous, and we have to step in and interrupt those and make the environment safe for everyone who's involved. So just remember that. A lot of times serious behaviors start as junk and they might escalate to serious. And so just know that you need to be watching that situation. And if it escalates into serious behavior, you do need to step in and intervene. So if we have serious behavior occurring, our goal is to use positive behavior support to either prevent serious behavior or interrupt it. And hopefully we're still in the junk phase at this point, and we can get them to de-escalate. A lot of times, if you have individuals with those types of undesirable behaviors, there are triggers or those precursor behaviors that we can watch out for. Those would be identified in a safety crisis plan. That safety crisis plan would also show us those things to look for before it escalates, what to do when we're at the peak of that escalation, and then what to do afterwards to help that individual respond to that crisis event. So we have a QR code here on this slide. If you scan that, you can get more information about the crisis cycles and how to do the planning for those safety crisis plans. So feel free to scan that and get more information about those. We also want to make sure that everyone is aware of our helpline within the state of Missouri, the 988 number. This is something that we can utilize when serious behavior is occurring or it's about to happen. We can call this number for support and resources in our area. Okay, so we have several examples on this slide of those 4 categories of behavior that we've talked about. Remember, those significant desirable behaviors are those that we really want to teach and encourage because they're going to help an individual live a happier, healthier, and more independent life. And The more that we can recognize and encourage these significant behaviors, the less likely we are to see some of the serious and the junk behaviors occur. The junk behaviors the just okay behaviors are usually just those typical behaviors that we've come to expect. We take them for granted. If we continue to take them for granted and don't recognize individuals when they have just okay behaviors, we're likely to see those types of behaviors diminish. And so the more that we can praise them and recognize them when they have just okay behaviors, the better the likelihood that we're going to continue to see those. And on the undesirable side, the just okay behavior, the junk behaviors. Well, let me see if my next slide has another. Nope. We've talked a lot about the serious and the junk behaviors. Junk is annoying, but it's not harmful. Serious is harmful, and we must intervene. So let's jump on to fundamental facts that can help us understand behavior. So the first one here is that the behavior an individual has is always right. And it's always right based on that individual's current environment as well as their learning history, right? Behaviors that an individual has come from their past. All of us have a different experience in life. We've been exposed to different people, different things, different responses from others that shape the way that we behave and respond. So we have to recognize that how a person responds with their behavior is always right, because that's where they come from. That's their whole history. It's their whole experiences coming out in that particular response. But we also need to remember that we can change someone's initial behavior response based on the consequences that we give them, and the changes that we could make to that particular situation to make someone hopefully more comfortable and respond in a more appropriate manner if their typical responses are not considered appropriate. The second fundamental fact is that consequences, or the way that we respond after a behavior, can either strengthen or weaken that behavior. The only way to know what the effects of a consequence are is to see what happens to that behavior in the future. Remember, we all have a why behind our behavior, right? We're trying to get something out of the way that we act, right? Some response. And so how other people respond to our behavior can either increase the likelihood we're going to repeat that behavior, or it can decrease the likelihood that we'll repeat that behavior. A lot of times we hear consequences used as a negative. It has a negative connotation in that it's typically something that is used as a negative or a punishment. But the word consequences could be anything. It could be positive or negative, based on our response, right? So if we think about the way that behavior happens, we have the antecedent. We have like the ABCs of behavior, the antecedent. So what happened before that behavior? We have the actual behavior, and then following the behavior, we have consequences. And so that consequence could be either something positive or negative, basically the way that we respond, that either increases or decreases the likelihood that behavior will happen in the future. Our third fundamental fact is that it takes time for changes in the environment to change behavior. So if we have targeted a specific undesirable behavior of someone, and we've thought about the type of response that we're going to have to try to change that behavior, what our technique is going to be. We want to try to put that technique in place for at least a couple of weeks. We have to be patient, and we have to observe, observe that behavior, and whether it's increasing or decreasing. Remember, that behavior is anything you can see and count. So we want to take data on what's happening to that behavior based on the technique that we're implementing. Is that behavior increasing or is it decreasing? If it's working, then we want to keep using this technique. If it's not working and we're not seeing a decrease to that undesirable behavior, then we probably want to tweak our technique or our plan, so that hopefully we do see the results that we want. Another fundamental fact of behavior is that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. Again, talking about our learning histories, as humans, we are creatures of habit. We all tend to do the same things over and over just because we get comfortable with how we do things, and it feels uncomfortable to get out of our patterns and our routines. I think about that even as a student. Like, when you would go to class, you probably tended to sit in the same seat all the time. As I drive to work, I tend to drive the same route all the time because it's comfortable and it's easy and it's what I know. The same with any type of behavior. We all kind of get in those patterns of behavior, and trying to change behavior is hard. It's hard to get people to step out of their comfort zones. And so just recognize that past behavior is a really good indicator of what's going to happen in the future, but it's not impossible to change behaviors. We just want to be able to anticipate any problems that we might see. Like, if we have a specific environment where we know an individual is having concerns, we can anticipate that, and we can try to put a plan in place to prevent those issues, those undesirable behaviors. All right, fundamental fact number 5 is that giving negative, coercive, and punishing consequences typically results in many problems, including more undesirable behaviors. We're gonna go into coercions a little bit more in a few minutes, but just know that sometimes when we respond in that negative, punishing way, we might get results short term, but in the long term, we're not changing that behavior. And this one goes right along with that last slide. In the long run, behavior change will happen much better and easier if we respond with positive consequences versus those negative, punishing consequences. We want to try to recognize desirable behaviors much more than we provide negative consequences. And we want to provide those positive consequences as much as possible. Just an example, who has ever had a demanding negative boss? And think about, of course, not the boss that you have now, but if you've had a boss in the past that you didn't really mesh with, who was demanding and didn't recognize you or value you, how much work were you willing to put in for that boss versus maybe you now have a much more positive, reinforcing boss, and how much more are you willing to put into your job just based on how that manager responds to you? Does anybody have an experience like that? I know I've had managers in the past that didn't inspire me to put forth my best effort. April, you asked in the chat box if we're going to send these slides. I will check and see on that. You may have to put your email in the chat box and I might be able to send those to you. All right. Let's jump ahead here. We're about halfway in and I'm running a little bit behind. So we're going to talk about that universal positive approach that we can use with anyone and everyone that we come into contact with. We can use this universal positive approach to increase the quality of relationships we have with everyone. In using positive behavior supports, it's not about trying to fix people or fix their behaviors. It's really about increasing that quality of life and the quality of the relationships we have with others. So as we've stated earlier, to effectively change behaviors, we need to pay more attention to the desirable behaviors that are occurring and minimize our attention to undesirable behaviors. So what are target behaviors? Target behaviors are those that you want to teach, you want to increase, or behaviors that you want to replace. When we teach desirable alternative behaviors, it can be very effective. Like if we can point out what is being done well versus what is undesirable, we really do strengthen and increase those desirable behaviors. And we weaken and decrease the undesirable behaviors when we are able to focus on a replacement behavior. So if we have a behavior that we want to change, we want to communicate to that individual what it is we do want to see rather than what we don't want to see. Using that to-do language can be very important in trying to change behavior. Ah, thank you, Kat. That's awesome. Okay, so she put the link up there for the PowerPoint and all of that. Oh yeah, I forgot these are recorded, so they're all going to be posted as well. Okay, so let's talk about how to motivate desirable behavior. Like I have said repeatedly through here, we want to put our attention and our emphasis on those desirable and healthy behaviors that are occurring. We want to make sure that we're pointing those out, that we're giving praise, we're giving those positive consequences for the good things that are happening. We want to minimize our reaction and our emphasis to undesirable behaviors. We don't want to reinforce those undesirable behaviors. So if we can minimize our attention to those, we're likely to see them decrease. When we're teaching desirable and healthy behaviors, like I said again, maybe you have something undesirable going on. So we want to replace that with the desirable behavior. We want to communicate what's desirable. We want to reinforce that and really just encourage them to do the right thing and not acknowledge when they're doing the wrong thing. And we also want to recognize that improvements are happening. So maybe we're not quite where we want to be, but we're going to continue working on it. We're going to continue giving them praise and recognition for the progress that they're making. Once again, with positive behavior supports, we are not focusing on the undesirable or inappropriate behaviors that we don't want to see. Instead, we are focusing on those desirable and healthy behaviors that we do want the person to be doing. So again, those replacement behaviors, we want to communicate to them what the expectations are. We want to praise them when they're making any positive progress towards getting to that point. And it's also important to recognize that when we're trying to change someone's behavior, we're probably going to have to change our focus and our reactions on how we interact with them. Those changes happen slowly. They they either happen slowly or sometimes they don't happen at all. And so if we see that, if we see them not happening, maybe we need to look at our reaction again and see if there's something else we could do to encourage them to change that behavior. Again, we're always looking for that improvement. We're not looking for perfection. I used to work at Children's Division, and I would argue this point all the time, that it's not about getting a family to a point of perfection, and making sure that their home looks like what my expectation of a home should look like. It's about seeing where that family started, and the point that they're at now. And was there improvement? And are they being successful at this point? So just remember that it's not always about them getting to the specific spot that you think they need to be. It's just the fact that they have shown improvement and they continue to make that progress. And remember that it takes patience, because that behavior change takes time. All right, so we're going to go into coercion. Coercion is one of my favorite discussions to have because we are all coercive. Um, and when I am brand new to Tools of Choice. Tools of Choice is our positive behavior curriculum, that we use on our tiered supports team. As I said, I have only been in my position about 2 years now. But when I first learned about Tools of Choice, I was like, oh my gosh, where has this been my whole life? Because that positive behavior support has improved my relationships with my family, with my coworkers, with everyone I come into contact with, just in the way that I'm able to respond to them in a more positive manner and avoid using these coercions that we're going to talk about. So coercion is a way that we punish people. In our society, we really have a societal impact of coercion, of punishment, of negative consequences. A lot of the way that we have grown up and what we've been taught and what we see in movies, in our penal system, it's all about coercion. And so the more that we can try to avoid being coercive, the better off that we're going to be, because coercion makes people feel bad. Sometimes the way that we respond to others is coercive. So I gave a few examples of how our society is coercive. Can you guys think of any ways that there's like a negative punishing aspect within our society? Some examples might be like, when you park in the wrong place, you get a parking ticket, or you get a speeding ticket when you're going too fast. Maybe it's you're late to work and so your pay got docked. Do you guys have any examples of how you can, of like how our society is coercive and in that negative and punishing way? I even mentioned like our penal system. So like when someone commits a crime, they do something wrong, well, then they go to jail, right? So we use the coercion of takeaway by taking away their freedom because they committed a crime. Can you guys think of any examples? I'm going to go ahead and move on here. But if you think of some examples, just pop them in the chat box there. Let's see here. These are just some quick examples of coercion on this slide, like using force, either verbal or physical, really tends to make that individual feel bad, and it takes the control away from them and puts it in our hands rather than theirs. If we use verbal coercion, that can be like calling names or being disrespectful. And a lot of times when we use coercion, it's something that we've been taught. Like I always think about like little kids when they're playing house and they'll take their baby doll and they'll tell them that their baby doll was bad and they give them a spanking. And that's something that they've learned through what they've lived. But it's a coercive reaction to an undesirable behavior. When we use coercion, a lot of times we're trying to teach that individual by punishing them. And like I just said, we're modeling that behavior. We're modeling that punishment to try to change behavior or change the fact that, motivate this person that something bad is going to happen if they don't act the way we want them to. There's a lot of, let's see here. Lindsay has a good response up here. Yeah, we use coercion in almost everything. Like break the law, you go to jail. If you speed, you pay a fine. If you mess up at work, you get written up or suspended. Yeah, those are all really great examples of just, how in general our society is coercive. And so we have seen, especially like if we look at our justice system, in the recidivism rate between the juvenile and the adult jail systems, that, we see 70% or more of people who are repeat offenders. They go back to jail. So that negative coercive punishment didn't work. You know what I mean? It didn't change their behavior. And so we want to try to use this more universal positive approach to try to change behavior overall. Okay, so let's talk about the word discipline. The word discipline actually means, usually what we think it means is that it's some kind of strict punishment that has negative consequences that's going to change someone's behavior. Discipline actually means following a teacher, or so like math, science, and English are actually disciplines. And so a discipline is actually something that's taught. If we're using punishment as our discipline, what are we actually teaching, modeling, and motivating others to do? We're not motivating them to change their behavior. We're motivating that punishment. We're motivating that coercive reaction, right? We're not teaching them what to do instead. So I've talked a little bit about using that to-do language. We want to make sure that we are responding in a way that is more positive. We want to make sure that we are managing our own responses so that we're not coming across in a coercive way. And that's really, really hard to do because, as we've just talked about, much of what we've been exposed to within our society is that negative type of coercion to try to change behavior. And so it really takes a good effort to change our responses and kind of go against everything that we've been taught. So let's talk a little bit about the actual 10 examples of coercion. Like I said earlier, we all use these. We are all coercive at some time or another. There are certain times when we have a tendency to be more coercive in our responses. And what we're asking you to do is to recognize what these coercions are, and to recognize when you might be more prone to respond to to someone in a coercive way. And that can really help us manage our responses so that we don't worsen the relationships we have with others by using coercion. So let's go through each one here. Questioning is a coercion. This is when you ask a question that you don't want answered. Things like, how many times have I told you? Do you want a spanking? Are you crazy? What are you doing? Basically, those questions that you're asking are creating a worse situation for the person. You're asking those questions to make that individual feel bad. Usually when we do this, it's a reaction. It's not really a planned response. When we ask all those questions, we're using a tone of voice or body language that is hurtful to the other person. We're just trying to make them feel bad, right? So let's go on to the next one. Arguing. So the definition of arguing is where you try to convince someone that your point of view is better, their point of view is wrong, or why they should do something differently. Typically, the way that you think it should be done. A lot of times when people argue, you're challenging that person's point of view in a coercive or confrontational way. And that's a worsening for your relationship. Think about arguing with your child. If you have a child, arguing with your child. Does anybody ever win in those arguments? Do you feel better after you've had that argument with your child? Not really, right? Like, usually there's no common ground that gets met. There's no compromise. You really just had an interaction that was negative for both of you, right? And then you both feel a little bit worse about your relationship. So just remember that everybody has different points of view or positions. And when we argue, we're often actually getting farther away from what we actually believe or our position that we're kind of standing on our hill and going to die on. And it becomes more about trying to win the argument rather than actually defending your point of view. It's not good. It's not good. We want to try to avoid arguing. And then let's talk about sarcasm and teasing. This is one of my favorite coercions. It's when you say the opposite of what you mean, or you make fun of someone either maliciously or playfully. When we do that, we have to recognize that sometimes the things we say are like we're saying mean things with a smile. And so we can tell our true feelings and insult someone or hurt someone else with our words, but because we smiled and said it was sarcasm, that made it okay. We want to try to avoid sarcasm, especially for those of you who are in the DD world. Not everyone understands sarcasm or picks up on that social cue of sarcasm. So they might honestly believe that what you say is true. And you're worsening your relationship because you're not being truly honest with them. They don't have the understanding to know that you're making fun of them or you're saying the opposite of what you mean. The next coercion that we talk about is force. Force can be either verbal or physical. Sometimes it's both. It's basically making someone do a task or something that they don't want to do. So I think about it as like my daughter, if she doesn't listen to a directive that I gave her, well, I gave her a directive for one. It was verbal force because I told her to do something that maybe she didn't really want to do. So when she refuses, I might take her arm and put her in timeout or take her to her room. That was physical force, because I made her go do something physically that she didn't want to do. Um, that really, it's coercion because it puts you up here and it puts the other individual down here. It takes away their control. It's disrespectful. A lot of times it is that reaction. It makes your relationship worse. It's not responding on an equal level. And then let's talk about threats. So, threats are when you point out all the bad things that will happen if someone continues to have undesirable behavior. Um, Basically, we're letting them know that if they don't comply, something bad is going to happen. We're doing that to ensure their compliance. Again, that's a control thing. That we're letting them know that if they don't comply, all of these bad things might happen. And then criticism. Criticism is one that I like to talk about because I think we all do it not with the intention of making someone feel bad, but with the intention of trying to teach them a new skill or try to correct them in something that we feel they're doing wrong. Um, so basically, criticism is when you tell someone that you don't like what they're doing or how they're doing it, and you try to teach them or make sure that they know how to do it better or how to do it the right way, which means the way that you think it should be done. Again, it's disrespectful. We need to recognize that, not everything has to be done in exactly the same way we would do them to get the job done successfully. So we want to make sure that when we're trying to teach others, that we're not inadvertently criticizing them. And then we have despair. This is also one of my favorites. So, despair is when you say and act like you don't know what to do, you're just giving up on this person, you're completely hopeless, they're completely hopeless because they're not going to comply with whatever it is. A good example of this one is I will ask my daughter to do the dishes sometimes, and she will refuse and procrastinate and complain and all of those negative things until I get to the point where I'm like, fine, okay, I'll just do them myself. So I completely despaired that she would ever be able to successfully complete this task. And in doing so, I gave her exactly what she wanted. I reinforced her behavior because I didn't follow through with her completing the dishes. And she got out of the chore, and I just felt bad because I let her do it. I just gave up on her. So despair, it can also look like guilting someone into doing a task that you want them to do. Um, a lot of times, you might say, like, oh, I'll do the dishes. I always do the dishes. Like, no one ever helps me. Like, doing that poor pity me, trying to guilt the individual into doing the task. So again, you're not changing someone's behavior and using this coercion. It's really just a poor response. And we just have a couple more. This one is lecture logic. This is my husband's favorite one. It's where you talk about what should have been done, or you talk too much, continue repeating something that the person already knows. Lecture and logic is often about trying to help someone not make the same mistakes that you did, by explaining your experiences to them and why they shouldn't do this thing. And You probably know that when we try to give unsolicited advice, that it often goes in one ear and out the other. Especially with kids, like they tune you out. I tell my husband this all the time. I'm like, they're not even listening to you. But lecture and logic is a coercive response. We also have to have enough respect for individuals to let them make their own mistakes sometimes. And unless they ask for our advice and our help, it's often not wanted. So you may just be talking to yourself. And then we have takeaway. Takeaway is just like it sounds. It's when you're taking something that is desirable to that person away as a punishment. So it could be taking their phone away, their video game time, their ability to go out with friends, anything like that. Just you're taking something away, removing a restriction or removing a right of that person. You're restricting that right by taking it away. Takeaway usually doesn't result in that person understanding that their behavior caused the removal of that item or privilege. It really becomes more of a like that control dynamic again. Again, it's you controlling that individual by taking away their desirable things. So there's a lot of blame that goes in there when you use takeaway. We really want to try to turn our response in takeaway to more of like an earn and don't earn situation. Of that, if you display this desirable behavior or meet this expectation, you can earn these things. And if they don't meet the expectation and don't earn that item, then that was in their control. It wasn't something that we imposed upon them. So before we move on here, we talked about all those 10 coercions. Does anybody want to share what your favorite coercions are that you, as we talked about them, you just know that those are the ones you tend to fall back on? As I said, mine is probably the sarcasm and the despair. And they're not effective, and they don't make my relationships more positive with my children or my coworkers. And so I have tried to be a lot more mindful about using them. The despair one, I still fall back into at home a lot. There were so many, you're right. Let me go back up to the list of all of them. Let me find it here. Oh, there we go. Oh, we might have had one more that I didn't get to. That last one, which was talking about bad behavior when the person is there. This one I'll explain just really quickly. This is when you're talking about something undesirable that the person has done while that person can hear you. I think of it with my kids a lot, like when they were younger and their dad would come home from work and I would be like, do you know what so-and-so did today? And then I would list all of the things that they did in front of them. So, so their dad would know and so that they could hear me say all the bad things they did that day. It happens a lot if you work within an agency at shift changes. As they're updating the next staff, they might point out some of the negative things that happen during the day while that person can hear. So does anybody want to share which ones you might fall back on? Lindsay says questioning, arguing, and lecturing. Yeah. Sarcasm. Yeah. I think we also have a tendency in our society to value sarcasm because we think it's like a quick wit. It's like an intelligent type thing to do. And so we don't often recognize that it's coercive. Questioning and sarcasm. Well, thank you guys for sharing. Like I said, remember when we talk about coercions, we are all coercive. Um, we just need to be more mindful that those coercions worsen our relationships with others. The way that we respond in those coercive ways um, can really affect the positivity of the relationship that we have with others. And so we want to be mindful and try to diminish and decrease our use of those coercive responses. And this is what you're going to see when you use coercion with others. You're going to see that it ages you. So, a lot of times, people who have been on the receiving end of a coercive response will try to avoid that person who was coercive. They'll try to get even with that person. They'll try to escape that person. And as we talked about earlier, we are modeling that coercive behavior, and so they're going to learn to behave coercively themselves. They're likely to be less confident with you because they fear that they might get that coercive response. And sometimes you might see those undesirable behaviors continue because they're getting the most attention for that undesirable behavior. They're getting a big coercive response, and maybe that's what they're looking for. Maybe they're just wanting that attention. They're wanting that big response, and we are giving it to them when we are coercive. Let's see here. So a lot of times we also think about socially mediated punishments. We talked a lot about when we went over the coercions about that control factor of like, this is me doling out a negative punishment to you. That's a socially mediated consequence. We probably want to rely more on those natural consequences to try to change behavior rather than those socially mediated consequences. They can be much more effective if it's a more natural response. Like I said earlier, sometimes we have to give individuals the freedom to fail because that's going to be a more important lesson to them in the long run when they get that natural type of consequence that comes from their actions and behaviors. All right. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, that we're all coercive, but we all also have times when we are more likely to have a coercive response. For me, it might be when I'm hungry. I get a little hangry. And so my responses might become a little more short and coercive. If I've had a bad day, I'm not likely to respond in the most positive of ways. If I'm frustrated or I'm overexcited, when someone is having that junk behavior that is just my personal pet peeve, it's really hard not to respond coercively to that. Do you guys have any times when you feel like you are more prone to be coercive in your response? And one good thing about recognizing when you're more likely to respond coercively, it can help you to try to manage those responses and to not be coercive, to respond in a more positive way. Thank you for your responses. Terry says when she's tired. Lindsay says when she's tired or frustrated. Sarah says when she's overwhelmed or she's rushing around trying to get things done. Yeah, those are all perfect examples of when we might have a more coercive response. Thank you for sharing. All right, I talked a little bit about this earlier, that coercion will produce short-term compliance. But it's typically followed by long-term problems. And a lot of times that goes back to some of those responses that we get from coercion. So, like the avoidance, trying to escape, trying to get even, things like that. We've worsened our relationship with that individual by using coercion. And we're likely to see that long term. So, if we're not using coercion or using those negative worsening consequences, what are we going to do instead? We probably need to think about making a plan of how we could respond in a more positive way. And some questions to consider when you're thinking about making that plan would be what triggered that behavior? So, what happened for that individual? What was the context of that behavior and what was that antecedent, the thing that happened before the undesirable behavior? And then think about what payoff is that person getting from their undesirable behavior? Like what are they looking for? What's their why? Why are they having that behavior? And then when that bad or worsening situation occurs in similar situations, do they sometimes have desirable behaviors or are they always responding in that same undesirable way? What happens if they do have the desirable behavior sometimes? Like what response might they get when they have the desirable behavior? And what are others getting out of the desirable behavior that they have? What does that person need to learn to do? So, like, what is that target behavior that maybe we want them to replace an undesirable behavior with? And is there anything that we can do within the environment, including our responses as well as the responses of others, to prevent that undesirable behavior and promote a more desirable behavior? So let me just give you an example where we kind of put all of these questions into practice here. So we have a young lady named Jo who ties a shirt around her neck when she's upset. When she does that, a support staff person is called in, and she ends up being put in restraints. So if we break that down by thinking about all of the questions that we just talked about. So let's talk about what triggered the undesirable behavior. So typically, Jo gets into a fight with her roommate and then she ties something around her neck. Sometimes she might also tie that around her neck, that shirt around her neck when the staff are really busy or when they're really short with her. So what payoff does she get from that behavior? Well, she's getting a lot of attention from that behavior, including touch. That support staff person is called in. Sometimes she and her roommate make up after she's tied something around her neck. So she's getting that positive response from her roommate now. Staff will rub her back. They'll give her lots of reassurance. Sometimes staff will step in and manage that makeup between she and her roommate. So when that situation occurs, is she always having that behavior of tying the shirt around her neck? So when she and her roommate fight, does she always tie something around her neck? Well, not always. Sometimes she cries and she wants to talk with staff in that situation. If staff is unable to talk with her right away, or they tell her she might have to wait a few minutes, she might move on to have that behavior of tying a shirt around her neck. So other responses that she gets from doing this behavior is that her roommates tell her to get away, that she's annoying. And so what do we need her to learn to do? Well, she could benefit from learning ways where she could make up with her roommate, like apologizing or trying to come up with a compromise or recognizing when others need space. So what needs to change in the environment? What type of responses do you think could help prevent that undesirable behavior of tying the shirt around her neck? Can you guys think of any examples? Like ways that you could change the response that is currently occurring to something more positive that might help change her behavior? So right now, when she has this behavior of tying a shirt around her neck, she's getting a support staff called in. Staff are comforting her and rubbing her back, reassuring her. Her roommate might give her some positive attention and apologize. They have a little makeup. Yeah, that's a good example, Sarah. Like maybe teaching her alternative ways to handle her anger, trying to replace that behavior of tying the shirt around her neck with something more positive, a more positive coping skill. I might also suggest that we don't respond with all of that attention. We definitely want to make sure that she is safe, but we don't need to sit with her and empathize with her and rub her back and give her all this attention and response when she's having an undesirable behavior. Yeah, definitely, Sarah. When she's using a healthy alternative coping skill, we definitely want to give her that extra positive attention and praise for using that coping skill instead. So, yeah. Positive behavior support, yes, not a reinforcement of the negative behavior. Exactly. That's exactly the whole point of positive behavior support, AJ, is that we're focusing on the things that she's doing well and not what is undesirable. And yeah, make sure that Terry, that's a good one. Make sure that she's getting lots of positive attention at other times so that she doesn't feel like she needs to engage in this undesirable behavior to get the attention that she needs. So yeah, thank you guys. All right, what else could we do? We could make sure that we have a positive relationship with Joe, right? Just like Terry said, we want to make sure that we're giving her that positive attention and interaction at other times so that we do build this positive relationship with her. So when we build positive relationships with others, we are less likely to see them engage in undesirable behaviors, or if they do happen to have an escalation of behavior, we're more likely to be able to de-escalate them if we have a positive relationship with them. These are the steps that we use from Tools of Choice in what we call a stay close interaction. A stay close interaction is just basically any interaction that you have with someone where you can use these positive behavior support skills to build a more positive relationship. So the steps of using stay close are that we move towards the person and we stay within arm's reach. We might use touch if it's appropriate, like a handshake or, a pat on the shoulder, a high five, fist bump. We're going to make sure that our facial expressions and our tone of voice remain very positive. And we're going to have relaxed body language. The most important parts to this relationship building technique are to use what we call OEE. The O stands for open-ended positive questions. So we might start a conversation with like, hey, what's up? How's your day going today? I heard you took a trip last weekend. Tell me about it. So we're going to ask a question that gets some positive conversation started. And then we also want to use an empathy statement. So we want to mirror back how that person is feeling about what they're sharing. And a lot of times I start these relationship building conversations with an empathy statement. I might say something like, you look really, really happy today. What's going on? So I had an empathy statement. You look really happy. Like I reflected back the emotion I'm seeing in them. And then I started with an open-ended question as well. And then we want to make sure that we give that person encouragement. So we want to recognize what they are doing well or what they have done well, and how they can continue that to continue having this good quality of life. So it might be something like, oh, well, it sounds like you had the best time on your vacation. I'm so glad that you are taking time for yourself, and you can come back refreshed. So you're recognizing what they have done well and why it's beneficial for them. We also want to make sure that we listen more than we talk. And we don't want to react to any junk behavior or use those coercive responses. And just a little more about using those empathy statements. It's really being able to take on the perspective of that other person and communicate that emotion to them. So we want to identify what emotion they might feel, and identify that we understand why they might feel that way. When we give empathy, it doesn't always mean that we agree with how they're feeling. It just means that we can understand why they might be feeling that way, given their experiences and their environment. And we're just reflecting back the emotion that we see that person having. So when we use encouragement, again, that's just being able to communicate how that person's behavior improved their situation or improved their life in some way. So we want to say something to let them know that we know, that they can continue to have those types of improvements in their life in the future. And also, we can let them know that we're available to help them or support them in those things. So let's do a little practice on using this OEE. Um, so we have scenario one. We have awesome Alex who just got his GED results back and he passed. He studied for hours, preparing for this test, and you're walking down the hall when he rushes over to show you his score. So what would your response be? Would you start with an empathy statement or maybe an open-ended question? Do you guys have any examples that you would share in the chat box? Like, how would you start a conversation with Alex? We're going to practice using this OEE here. So I'm looking for either an open-ended question or an empathy statement to start the conversation. Yeah, Lindsay has a great one. She got both in here. She got the empathy and the open-ended question. You seem excited, Alex. What's going on? Perfect. Yeah. So you reflected back the emotion of Alex. You asked him an open-ended question. And then Sarah gave us a great encouragement statement here. Alex, your hard work paid off. I'm proud of you. Yeah, so she recognized what he had done well. And then she gave him that support that she's very proud of him for his hard work and that he's passed his GED. Very good. Thank you guys. Let's do another one here. So we have coworker Carl. He's walking into the break room with his lunch. Or you're walking into the break room with your lunch, and Carl smiles and says hi to you when he sees you. He moves his papers aside to let you sit down. So, what might be a good OEE to start this conversation with Carl? So, we're probably looking for an open ended question or an empathy statement to start. Karen says, hi, Carl. It's good to see you. Is it okay if I sit here to eat my lunch? Yeah. And then, hey, Carl, it's good to see you. Thanks for making some space. What have you been up to lately? Yeah, that's a really good example. Um, just thanks for making some space. You recognized what he did to welcome you. And then you asked that open ended question. What have you been up to lately? Right? Our goal is to get that conversation going. And then if you were to give an encouragement statement, say at the end of lunchtime, what's an encouragement statement you might give Carl? Yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your day. Perfect, Sarah. So you might say something like, it was so good to sit and chat with you. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Yeah, just letting him know what a great thing he did by, making that space for you to have lunch and visiting with you. And we're going to encourage him to have a good rest of his day. Very good. So now we're going to move on to that tool that I talked about how we can respond in a different way to junk behavior to try to decrease that behavior or change that behavior. The tool that we use is called Pivot. Remember how we talked about that all behavior has a why under it? Like there's some kind of payoff that people are getting for their behaviors. Junk behavior is often to try to get attention. It's trying to get you to comfort that person or get you to react. And they're really trying to get you to react in a coercive way so that they get that response, that payoff that they're looking for. Basically, yeah, you're just trying to think about what that person is trying to get out of the junk behavior that they're displaying. There's some why behind it as to why they have junk behavior. We talked about this earlier that often those episodes of serious behavior start with junk behavior. And the escalation happens when we get a response from others to that junk behavior. It can tend to increase that escalation into a serious behavior if the responses and the reactions they're getting to their junk behavior are negative. It can escalate to the serious behavior. So if we're going to use our pivot tool to react to junk behavior, or basically to not react to junk behavior, pivot means that we are not going to react to that junk behavior with our tone of voice, with our facial expressions, with our body language. We're not going to say anything or acknowledge that junk behavior at all. There are 3 types of pivot that we can use. The first one is where we might pivot to another person. So let's say we have an individual with some junk behavior over here. They are, maybe they're repeatedly asking the same question over and over. And rather than respond to those repeated questions, we can pivot to another person. Let's say there's another individual in the room. You might turn your attention briefly away from this person asking questions to this other person in the room and engage them in a brief interaction. So you might say, "Hey, you look like you're really enjoying that puzzle today. Can you tell me a little bit about what your plans are for the day?" So you're just going to have a brief interaction with that other person. And then you're going to turn back to this person who's asking all of the questions. And we're going to give them some type of open-ended question or praise statement, recognize something that they're doing well. So if this person is asking repeated questions, and you might say, "Oh, thank you for waiting while I was talking to John over here. Can I help you with something?" So you're continuing to have a positive interaction with this person with junk behavior. But to manage your own reaction, you took a second to take your positive attention away from this person over here and turn to someone else. Positive interaction. And then the pivot is back to this person with the junk, where we're going to point out something desirable. We're going to give them an open-ended question. We're going to point out something, maybe it's a just okay behavior that they're having that we're going to reinforce. But that's pivot on another person. If we're going to pivot to an activity, it's the same thing. We're just going to turn our attention briefly away to a nearby activity that we focus on. And then after 10 to 15 seconds, we're going to turn back to this junk behavior person and recognize something that they're doing well. Give them an open-ended question or a positive statement. If you're going to pivot on the person, you're continuing to have an interaction with this person as if that junk behavior is not even happening. You're not going to have any reaction to the junk. You're just going to continue to have a positive conversation with them and continue to recognize what they are doing well. So it's important to remember when we use pivot that the junk behavior doesn't always stop. We might see it start to diminish. It might not ever fully stop. We might not see any change in the behavior at all. Pivot is a tool really just for us to manage our reactions so that we don't respond in a coercive way to this individual with junk behavior. I hope that made sense. So I also said earlier we were going to talk about why we don't just ignore junk behavior. Ignoring junk behavior can be coercive. It can be reinforcing. And then it can also cause a behavior burst. Like I think of like if you have your kiddo in the store and they want your attention and they're like, "Mom, mom, 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 mom." You know, like if you don't respond, if you ignore them, you're going to see that behavior burst. You're going to see that behavior become more intense and frequent until they get what they want, right? That's why we don't want to ignore the behavior. When we use pivot, we can increase those desirable and just okay behaviors of the person because we're continuing to point those out and praise those rather than giving our attention to the undesirable behavior. Hopefully, we're weakening that undesirable behavior by focusing on what's going on that's positive. We also help prevent that behavior burst because we are engaging with them in that positive manner. And hopefully we're also preventing an escalation to serious behavior by continuing to respond in that positive way. We are just about at time. So we had a couple of practice on pivot. I'm going to skip. I do want to talk about stay close hot really quick before we end. I talked earlier about how we have those stay close interactions to maintain a positive relationship. A stay close hot interaction is when we have someone who's escalated and we are trying to get them to de-escalate. So the steps are basically exactly the same as a stay close interaction. The only thing is we may have to repeat that cycle of open-ended questions, empathy, and encouragement. We might need to repeat those steps multiple times until that individual starts to de-escalate. We also, when we use stay close hot, we don't want to throw solutions at the problem that's occurring. We really want that person to be able to stay in their feelings, to be able to express their feelings. We can mirror that back to them with those empathy statements. And we wait for them to de-escalate and come back down before we start helping them problem solve. Or guiding them to a calming situation or activity that they would enjoy that would help them continue to further de-escalate. All right, I am going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I have a couple of informational slides here at the end. This QR code actually will take you to a podcast where we talk a little bit more about those 10 common coercions if you're interested in more information about that. And then we have, we do offer tools of choice as a full class where you can earn competency in this positive behavior support curriculum. If you were to scan this QR code, it will take you to the registration for that course. My team actually teaches that tools of choice class. That's one of our main roles. And then we are also offering what is called family coaching workshops, where we meet twice a month for a 1-hour session. These occur in the evenings from 6 to 7 p.m., really geared towards families. But we talk about each of the tools that are included in the tools of choice curriculum. And it's an 8-week series where we focus on one of the tools each time we meet. And at the end of the series, you should have learned several new techniques that you can use with your family and friends and coworkers to help continue to develop those positive relationships. I want to thank everyone for your attendance today. You guys had great participation. I hope that you learned something that you can take away from this. And I hope that you have a good rest of your Friday.